Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to our program on Kardec Radio. And now, here's our host, Dr. Vanessa Anceloni.
Welcome, dear listener, to Kardec Radio. We are here at the 6th U.S. Spiritist Symposium in Atlanta, Georgia. We are recording a lot of experiences here for you, so in a week we can report it to you, the highlights of this phenomenal event. And if you are somewhere there, not exactly here at the Rialto Center, you can watch it live through the webcast that Daniel Santos is putting together through tvcei.com. So today we have a special show about trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, or combat stress, some form of traumatic stress, and also the possibility that there are spirit entities intervening when we are feeling traumatized. Dr. Krippner, Stanley Krippner, is here with us. He's going to talk to us about his research in collaboration with other colleagues in regard to these very studies. Dr. Stanley Krippner is a professor of psychology at Saybrook University in San Francisco. He is also a member of the American Psychology Association and its past president. And not only that, but he has written many important books. Amongst them, two of them we are actually going to mention here to you. Haunted by Combat, Understanding Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder in War Veterans, and also most recent one talking about post-traumatic stress disorder. We're going to talk about them, and you can go to his website, stanleykrippner.com, and get to know more about these books and many others. As we're speaking here, Bezerra Online Web Radio is also retransmitting live Kardec Radio show. You can follow the program of our sister radio, Bezerra Online, at spiritist.com. We also want to remind you that we have an ongoing campaign, I Honor My Parents. I Honor My Parents campaign, it's the most important raising awareness campaign on the importance of being reverent and respectful to our parents. It's a campaign that is there also to give support and empower parents in their most missionary role. The upcoming talk at the Spirit Side of Baltimore and the Spirit Side of Virginia at the beginning of June is entitled Mother Mary, Role Model in Parenting. You can watch it live on Saturday at the Spirit Side of Baltimore. Or you can also stay here at Kardec Radio on that very Saturday and listen to Dr. Vicky, who is a specialist in bullying. She's going to explain what bullying is all about and the therapy for it and how parents can actually either prevent, avoid, treat, care for their children, either if they are bullies or they're being bullied. Something that Dr. Krippner is going to address today as also another source of trauma and consequent post-traumatic stress disorder caused by bullying. So, as we talk about trauma, of course, at Kardec's time, this word didn't exist. If we try to search for the word trauma or the word stress, post-traumatic stress disorder, it wasn't addressed that way at Kardec's time. What could be correlated when he talks about those crystallizations of the soul, those difficulties that are transposed from one reincarnation to the next? And a beautiful thing is, in the chapter that talks about the intervention of spirits in our lives, in question and answer 503, Kardec asks whether protecting spirits also suffer when they see us suffering. Think about it right now, dear listener. As we're talking about post-traumatic stress disorder, traumas, etc., many people may be asking, where are my guardian angels that do not prevent me from actually undergoing certain traumatic experiences? And here is Kardec at the vanguard of humanity's thought and its science, asking this very question, where are they? How do they see it? And the answer to his question is, protecting spirits suffer from their words' misdeeds, and they pity them. But this affliction has none of the anguish of terrestrial parenthood, because they know that there is a remedy for the evil, and that what is not done today will be done tomorrow. The perspective, dear listener, of guardian angels and protecting spirits is very different from the ones we're used to in our daily lives. We need to deepen our understanding to feel their protection and count on their approach during, before, after traumatic experiences, because as we know through psychology, and Dr. Krippner is going to address that, we can never be so prepared to experience trauma because it happens with the unexpected. But we're going to get to know more about what to do with it. Dr. Krippner is going to be here with us talking about these and much more. This is a very therapeutic show, as all programs at Kardec Radio, because we are here to nourish your soul. We'll go to the first break, and when we come back, we have here Dr. Krippner with us.
We will return to our program after these messages.
Would you like to liberate yourself from your life struggles or to find inner balance? The Inner Journey CD has 3 beautiful visualizations that will help you bring harmony to your life. As Joanna DeAngeli tells us to, live in a way that you leave enlightening footprints in your pathway as if they were stars pointing out the pathway to happiness. To find this CD, go to the bookstore on the Spiritist Society of Baltimore webpage, www.ssbaltimore.org. That is www.ssbaltimore.org, and start your inner journey today.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Save the date for the 6th U.S. Spiritist Symposium that will be held at the Rialto Center for the Arts at Georgia State University in Atlanta, Georgia on Saturday, May 12, 2012. This year's topic is Love and Enlightenment, a Pathway to Self-Healing. Come out and enrich your mind, body, and soul. For more info, go to www.spiritistsymposium.org.
And now we return to our program.
The show today is about trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, and the possibility of investigating the presence of spirit entities playing a role in our trauma, post-traumatic stress disorders, etc. Dr. Stanley Krippner, professor of psychology at Saybrook University, San Francisco, renowned mind in the American Psychological Association. He got an award in 2002 for distinguished contributions to the international advancement of psychology. He has recently published a new book on post-traumatic stress disorder, which is in the series of biographies of disease, together with Doctors Daniel Pitchford and Janine Davis, whom, by the way, are clinical psychologists specialized in post-traumatic stress disorder. Dr. Stanley Krippner is here with us, and we are cherishing his company as we enjoy this new learning experience about what is post-traumatic stress disorder and what to do with them, therapies, and the most recent advancements in our current scientific advancements. Thank you so much, Dr. Krippner, for being with us today at Kardec Radio.
Yes, thank you.
Dr. Krippner, talking to the lay public about post-traumatic stress disorder may be very complicated, and one of the main things that people often misconceive is the definition of the underlying mechanism of post-traumatic stress disorder, which is trauma. How can you explain it to our audience? What is trauma?
I think the easiest way to explain that is that in the United States, 9 out of 10 people go through a potentially traumatizing experience at least one time in their life.
Wow.
They can be in an automobile accident, they can fall off a roof, they can be bullied at school, they can be emotionally attacked, they can be traumatized in a number of different ways. Now, just because a event is potentially traumatizing does not mean that it's going to leave somebody with post-traumatic stress disorder, because the majority of people are resilient. They take it in stride. They fight back. They forgive the person. They ignore the person, or they assimilate the event and don't make such a big deal of it. If they were injured, they get therapy for their physical injury. They go on with their lives. I was hit by a car when I was jogging in Spain a number of years ago, and I broke 7 bones, and I had a brain concussion. And I was told that many people have nightmares about something like that for the rest of their lives. Well, I didn't. I went through the period of physical therapy, and I recovered, and I still have the scars. I still have the metal in my body. But for me, that was not a traumatizing event. For another person, yes, it could have been. It could have been something that would have affected them for life. They might never have gone out into the street again. So different people react in different ways.
You're talking about the way we respond to trauma. It may vary from person to person. So what may be traumatizing for one, not necessarily will be for somebody else. Is that right?
That's right. There are many predisposing causes of trauma. First of all, you have the genetic component. Some people are simply born susceptible to trauma. They're what we call thin-boundaried people. Now, having thin boundaries is very advantageous in some ways. You can enter into personal relationships much more quickly. You can appreciate art and music and food much more delectably. But the downside of being thin boundaries is that negative things affect you more seriously. Now, thick-boundaried people might not enjoy art, music, and food as much as thin-boundaried people, and they might be a little more difficult to relate to, but they're strong, they're stalwart, they do a good job's work, they don't get distracted, and so there's advantages and disadvantages to being either thin-boundaried or thick-boundaried. But it's the thin-boundaried people that first of all have more nightmares, so they're predisposed to nightmares that are associated with the trauma that might occur. And secondly, because they're so emotionally sensitive, they're going to be hurt. They're more fragile. They're more vulnerable than other people. Now, they might go through life never experiencing a serious trauma, which is fine. Then they can enjoy the benefits of being thin-boundaried without the disadvantages. However, once the potentially traumatizing event occurs, the thin-boundaried person is especially vulnerable, and it often leaves them with what we call a traumatic experience. An experience is different than an event. An event just happens. It's neutral. An experience is the reaction to what happens. As Marcus Aurelius, the Roman philosopher, said many centuries ago, it is not what happens to us that's important, it's how we react to what happens to us that is important. Mm-hmm. And that's where the traumatic experience begins. It's the reaction to the event. Not the event itself, it's the reaction to the event.
But Dr. Krippner, since one of the elements, as you talk about in your book, one of the elements of trauma counts on the unexpected, does it mean that there is no way to prevent us from actually being traumatized in life, in general?
There's no way to protect people from experiencing a potentially traumatic event. But remember that the event does not traumatize everybody. Some people, as children, are taught life is tough. Life is full of surprises. You're going to get into arguments with people. People are going to pick on you. People are going to insult you. Life is not predictable. A meteorite might fall out of the sky and hit the house. Now, you don't want to scare children, but by telling them about what life is really like, and that it's not all peaches and cream, and it's not all flowers and ribbons, they grow up a little more attentive to what could be happening, and a little more understanding about the vicissitudes that life brings its way. If children are overly protected, and if their parents try to keep anything unpleasant from them, then they are much more vulnerable to being traumatized when one of these events comes along.
All right. So extending a little bit on the philosophical perspective of it, as you're talking about being, less vulnerable and the preventative opportunities here. Kardec himself, when asking some of the questions in the Spirit book, talking about how we can become less vulnerable in life, etc., the answer was, well, getting to know of yourself. So probably changing perspective and getting to know of ourselves will probably make us be less predisposed to these unexpected occurrences and the difficulties we may face with them. Would that be in that line?
Yes, I think Kardec was absolutely right, because people who know themselves know how they're going to react to something better than people who are oblivious about themselves and their own inner nature. Greek philosopher Epictetus was on to this. Socrates, another Greek philosopher, said, know thyself. And then Epictetus said, if you know yourself, you know how you're going to react to a surprise, even an unpleasant surprise. It's not that surprise that's going to hurt you. It's your reaction that's going to hurt you. So self-knowledge is a very good guardian against coming down with post-traumatic stress disorder.
It makes sense to us. Can we also, is it possible, can we also say that people who have a more spiritual perspective in life may be less predisposed to these unexpected occurrences and the consequent reaction that would develop into trauma? Is it possible to elaborate a hypothesis in that line? Or yes?
Yes, I think it's possible. That depends what sort of spiritual approach they have. If they have a very naive spiritual approach and say, if I'm such a good person, nothing bad is ever going to happen to me, well, that's not a very helpful approach to become resilient. If they have a spiritual approach that calls upon God and the forces of the universe to help them whenever they're in difficulty, then they have a resource. Then they can pull upon something. I worked with a veteran from Iraq who has nightmares every single night, and he is so traumatized by the bombs that went off and the explosive devices which mangled his leg that he became very aggressive, and he lost his wife, he lost his children, he lost his job, he lost his home, and he said had absolutely nothing. And I said, well, don't say you have absolutely nothing, just give some thought. What do you have going for you? He says, well, I know that Jesus loves me. And I said, all right, get a picture of Jesus and imagine that he is helping you. And the soldier says, I feel like I'm just barely hanging on. I'm on a ledge, I'm barely hanging on. I'm falling off any minute. And I said, well, let Jesus pull you up from the ledge, and he will be supporting you, and you can always fall back upon something greater than yourself when you are having some of these problems. And this was something he had never thought of before, but this was very, very helpful to him. And it gives him a beginning toward reconstructing his life and putting things back together again. So the type of spiritual support that emphasizes self-reliance and doesn't leave it all up to chance or fate or karma and takes some responsibility on one's own shoulders that's a type of spiritual support that I think can be very helpful when there's a trauma.
Makes sense to us. Now we're going to a short break. When we come back, we have more with Dr. Krippner.
We will return to our program after these messages.
Kardec Radio, live, every Saturday at 11 a.m.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
The International Spiritist Council is organizing and promoting the 7th World Spiritist Congress, which will be held in Havana, Cuba on March 23rd through the 25th of 2013. The Congress theme will be Charity and Spiritual Education in Building a World of Peace. 150 years of the Gospel according to Spiritism. For more information, please visit www.7cem.org.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Join us every Thursday live, Evolution in Two Worlds, a journey of the soul through the teachings of the Spirit Doctor, Andrea Luiz. Connect at www.tvcei.com, Channel 2.
And now we return to our program.
We are here with Dr. Krippner learning more about trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, how our perspective in life can change our predisposition to traumas. Dr. Krippner, as you have in your new book, in collaboration with Daniel Pitchford and Dr. Davies as well, who are psychologists in post-traumatic stress disorder, in this just released book, it talks to us about the different ways in which we have been come across in our society with the phenomenon of post-traumatic stress disorders in different terminology, and it's been quite recent since science in general has diagnosed it and defined it as post-traumatic stress disorder, and officially including it in the medical literature. How are we doing in regard to the science, and especially the neuroscience of PTSD? What does it tell us?
Well, this goes way back in human history. In Greek mythology, there was a hero by the name of Hercules, and he undertook what are called the 10 major labors, and they involved cleaning out a stable and destroying monsters and all of that. Each one of those was a potentially traumatizing event. He got home, and he was completely traumatized. He was so angry that he killed one of his children, and he insulted his wife. He was terrible to live with. And the gods had to come and calm him down, because here was a hero, but he was behaving in outrageous ways. In both the Old Testament of the Christian Bible and in the Quran of Islam, you have the story of poor Isaac, who was taken by his father, Abraham, up into the mountains, and Isaac was going to be a sacrifice. The story goes that God had told Abraham, I'm going to give you a test, and I want you to kill your son Isaac. So Abraham, not being able to think for himself, and not being able to, at that stage of history, to realize what was a hallucination, what was inspirited, took poor Isaac up, and he had poor Isaac on the stone ready to slash him with a knife and cut his throat. And just then a ram came running along, and God said, okay, or Allah, depending on which version you read, you can go after the ram and kill that instead. Well, that worked. Isaac's life was changed, but that was traumatic for Isaac. And you know, you read the Bible, and Isaac portrays all the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. He never amounted to very much in his life. He waited until he was about 50 years of age to get married, which was very old in those days. He didn't have much of a enjoyable family life. He didn't have any career that amounted to much. So here we have post-traumatic stress disorder in mythology, and in biblical times. Now you trace that up and you can find examples in recorded history, and you can go back to American history. And the Civil War, of course, was an absolutely terrible war. More soldiers were killed on both sides in the American Civil War than were killed in all of the other American wars together. It was absolutely brutal. And soldiers suffered from that, and it was called soldier's heart because they were very, very sensitive. It was felt that their heart was affected. And then there wasn't much in terms of therapy for it, but in the First World War, it was known as shell shock. And by that time, there was some psychotherapy, primarily psychoanalysis, which took a long time, but did help some people. And then First World War came along. We had battle fatigue, and so there have been different names given to these conditions, and in all of these conditions, you see a potentially traumatizing event become a traumatizing event to a number of people who then make it into a traumatic experience. Now, this also goes, as I said before, for other experiences in life. People can be in car accidents, automobile accidents, airplane accidents, and they're traumatized. They'll never take a plane again. They'll never get into a car again. They're bullied in school, so they become socially reclusive. And some of them actually hang themselves or kill themselves because they've been traumatized by bullying and name-calling. And so trauma can happen to people at very, very early ages. Now, not everybody who is bullied is traumatized. Some have the resilience to just shrug this off and think, well, this is stupid, this is an immature person, and I'm not going to let them, keep me from getting on in my life. And then, of course, you have the very, very sad instances of children and young adults who are physically abused, emotionally abused, and sexually abused. And this can often be traumatizing. And this can lead to the hallmarks of traumatic disorders, the basic hallmarks, the emotional numbing, where they don't really feel much of anything, and hyperactivity, where they can't concentrate too well on anything, and also flashbacks, where many things start to remind them of the traumatic experience. If there was a bomb going off when in civilian life and they hear a firecracker, they might still jump to the floor because they've been conditioned that way. So these are the basic hallmarks of what we call a post-traumatic disorder. Some people don't like the disorder, and I say, well, let's just call it a post-traumatic stress and end with the word stress. Or just call it, in the Army, I say call it combat stress. That takes all the negativity out of it. And you can deal with it under any name that will make people feel comfortable, any name that will make people less likely to avoid going for help to a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a social worker.
Yeah, I understand that the term disorder is just reflecting the fact that it can make people really dysfunctional and changing their ways of acting in any way. But Dr. Krippner, there's so much to understand and know about it. Two main things we would like to ask you regarding everything you have been saying here. One is about the fact that when we bring reincarnation into the picture, let us suppose that somebody is two children, same parents, abusive parents. One develops a trauma and then a full-bloom PTSD related to that abuse. The other doesn't. Talking once in Brazil with a psychologist named Ruth Brazil in Bahia, Salvador, Bahia, at the Divaldo Franco's mention of the way she said, Vanessa, you know what? We realized that previous lives events can predispose us to trauma as well. What do you think in that regard?
Well, remember that I said that there were predisposing factors that go back to early childhood experiences and go back to genetic factors. Mm-hmm. And, of course, past lives could be one of the predisposing factors. Mm-hmm. And somebody can come into this life without having resolved all of the issues and problems of the previous life, which means they still have work to do, and maybe getting over the trauma is one of the works that they have to do in this particular life. Mm-hmm. So, if reincarnation exists, and it certainly might be happening all the time, that can be a predisposing factor for a post-traumatic stress disorder. Mm-hmm. And that also might explain, to a certain extent, why some people have a traumatic experience after one of these events, and some people do not have a traumatic experience. Some people are much more sensitive than others.
Mm-hmm. In a way, it can also really empower people. So once they know they have the predisposition inside of them, we can be more empowered to change it instead of blaming somebody else for exposing us to traumatic events. So it can be really empowering. Now, if we go back, Dr. Krippner, to one of the comments you talked about in the American culture, it's quite unique for its relationship with battles and wars, and its dynamics. So when you talked about the Civil War, and you talked about how traumatic it was for many of the soldiers and including the families, are there studies already showing how those events back then reflected throughout the generations into today's dynamics of the American family?
Well, yes, you have what we call intergenerational trauma. You see this in many, many instances. You see this in slavery, where somebody was raised a slave and, of course, mistreated very, very badly, not given their freedom, and then their children were freed by the Emancipation Proclamation during the Civil War, but they still had the scars of their parents' slavery. But then their children come along, and we still have some scars of the slavery because that's part of the heritage. Now, that isn't only on the basis of family history, but when a person is traumatized, it does strange things to the genes. It does not change the DNA, it does not change the genes, but it changes the gene expression, the way that the gene unfolds and expresses itself. And genes for sensitivity can be much more liable to be expressed. There's a whole science of gene placement called epigenetics that show how genes can change from one generation to the next. The same way with the people in the concentration camps during the Second World War, the Jews and the Slavs and the Gypsies and the homosexuals and all of the undesirables that the Nazis put into the concentration camps. Well, you're finding symptoms not only with their children and grandchildren, but now even some symptoms with the great-grandchildren. Mm-hmm. So intergenerational trauma is a fact of life, and we're finding this when we are doing the studying. It gets a little bit less in each generation, but you take a horrible trauma like this, and it doesn't only affect the adults, it affects the children and the children's children. Just look what's happening in the Middle East right now, not only in Afghanistan and Iraq, but in Israel and in Palestine. And also the wars going on in Syria right now, where dreadful things are happening to adults and to children and to civilians. Well, it's not going to stop there. You know that Israeli children and Palestinian children, 50% of them have nightmares almost every night. So, yeah, they're being traumatized by the war that is going on. And the leaders who are not working very hard to resolve things and have been sort of protecting their so-called rights and their so-called Holy Land, all of these generations, are not really caring about what devastation these wars are having on the psyche of their children.
Wow, that's shocking. And also shocking is when I look at this timeline that you publish in this most recent book, Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. When we look at 2010, and it says the rate of suicide among veterans increases every year since records were first kept in 1974, the rate is especially high among veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan. It's suicide as a byproduct of PTSD. Is that right?
Yes. You see, the book that you're talking about is one of a very profound series. The series is called Biographies of Disease, and these are diseases of the 21st century, like PTSD. And we have a timeline in there tracing the whole course of PTSD and all the names it's been called. And one of the shocking things now about PTSD is that so many veterans are committing suicide more and more each year. The government is putting a lot of money into suicide prevention programs, and I'm sure it's working to some extent, but it still hasn't rolled back the number of suicides. During the course of 3 days, probably 1 or 2 soldiers will be killed in Afghanistan or Iraq. But in the meantime, 2 or 3 dozen veterans will be committing suicide. I mean, this is like an epidemic. And so why are they committing suicide? Well, I've talked with many of them, and many of them commit suicide because they realize that they have killed somebody, they've killed the enemy. And people who have actually killed an enemy soldier are much more liable to both PTSD and suicide than those who haven't, or who have done it from a plane and haven't seen who they've killed. But it's especially harmful when the soldier has killed an innocent civilian or killed a child. And this is something that they just can't get out of their mind. The shame, the guilt, the horror of it all is painful, and this is a physical pain as well as an emotional pain. And eventually that pain gets so intense that the easy way out is just to kill oneself and end it all. So this comes up in nightmares, it comes up in daytime flashbacks. Fortunately, we do have some very good therapeutic procedures, and I'm not talking about medication. Medication is only good in the short run and only good for very serious cases. It's not really our main line of defense for PTSD in the long run. We have very good psychotherapies. We have cognitive behavioral psychotherapy. We have psychodynamic psychotherapy, humanistic psychotherapy, implosion psychotherapy, existential psychotherapy, eye movement psychotherapy, and all of these therapies work about the same. They're all pretty effective. The trick is to get the veteran to go to a psychotherapist. Half of the veterans with PTSD don't even go near a psychotherapist. And the half that do, 25% of that 50% drop out after the first meeting.
Wow.
So veterans feel that there's sort of a stigma. It's sort of a attack on their career, on their masculinity, or if it's a female veteran, on their strength and their resilience. And it's like admitting defeat to go to a psychotherapist or a counselor, even a pastoral counselor or a spiritual counselor. And we've got to get over this stigma one way or the other. I have to say that the Army has gone a long way in terms of helping soldiers get over the stigma. And one way they have done this is to take away the word disorder. Some of them talk about the post-traumatic stress injury. Some of them simply talk about post-traumatic stress. And some of them use an even better term, combat stress, which is fairly neutral. You use anything that you can to get these veterans who need it in to see somebody who's knowledgeable, who knows what he or she is doing, and can help not only reduce the symptoms, but reduce the basic existential mythology that puts the blame on them. No, they're not to blame for the killing that they've done. War is to blame. War is hell, like General Sherman said during the Civil War. And you get into a war situation, you're going to do a number of things you would not ordinarily do in a civilian situation. These are the facts of life. These are the facts of war. Let's face it. Let's get on with it.
Yeah, Dr. Krippner, as you're talking about it, we'll go into a short break. When we come back, we're going to ask you a question about the social implications of PTSD in war veterans.
We will return to our program after these messages.
Enjoy this new release. Reborn for Love, of the renowned Brazilian scientist and researcher on reincarnation, Dr. Hernani Andrade. This novel describes one of the most extraordinary and genuine cases of reincarnation ever studied by Dr. Andrade's Brazilian Institute of Psychobiophysics Research in Sao Paulo State. Order your copy now at roundtable.uk@gmail.com or at www.roundtablepublishing-uk.com.
Spiritist Network, your gateway to on-demand Spiritist videos. www.spiritistnetwork.com.
Spread the word. Kardec Radio, to learn more about Spiritism.
Want to find a good way to explain life after physical death to kids or teenagers? Check out the book Message from a Teen in the Spirit World by the Spirit Neo Lucio and Secograph by Chico Xavier. In this book, a teenager named Carlos explains his impressions on the new life in the spirit realm with his discarnate relatives and new friends. Purchase your copy online at www.ssbaltimore.org.
The Spiritist Magazine is a trimestral digital periodical that publishes the latest news on the Spiritist thought and the movement in the USA and worldwide. Subscribe now at www.spiritistmagazine.com.
Hello, dear Kardec Radio listener. Welcome to our segment, Spiritism in Your Life. Very often in our daily lives, we're faced with difficult times, difficult situations. Even though we think that we're doing our best to improve ourselves, to evolve, and we're working so hard to achieve our goals, sometimes they simply don't come. There are frustrations, there are difficulties in our family, in our work, in our material needs, and so many other things. So considering that scenario, most of us will get into a stage of despair and we will not accept what we're going through. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about how Spiritism helps us cope. As our friend Julio Perez talked about 2 weeks ago, we're going to discuss the effects of reincarnation in our ability to accept and to cope with difficulties. We can find in the Gospel according to Spiritism, chapter 5, item number 3, the justice of afflictions, that the compensations that Jesus promised to the afflicted of the earth cannot occur except in the future life. Without certainty about the future, these maxims will be nonsense. Even more, they would be a falsehood. Continue on item 13. It is said that humans can either soften or increase the bitterness of their trials according to the manner in which they view earthly life. Their suffering is greater if they consider its duration to be long. Consequently, those who look at things from the standpoint of the spirit life understand corporeal existence at a glance. They see it as a dot in the infinite. They grasp its brevity, and they tell themselves that this painful moment will soon be over. The certainty of a happier future that is not far off sustains and encourages them, and instead of complaining, they thank heaven for the pains that enable them to evolve. As we can see, my dear friends, in these two passages from the Gospel according to Spiritism, that believing in a future life and looking at our current difficulties from the standpoint of the spiritual life makes everything easier, makes all the trials less bitter, smaller, and easier to overcome. And you can certainly understand why believing in Spiritism and reincarnation can help you soften the burden of your daily difficulties. But not only in the gospel we can find this affirmative. In a recent study by Stanley et al. From 2006, it was shown that the belief in life after death in a nationwide sample of 1,403 Americans was associated with less severe levels of 6 sets of symptoms, including anxiety, depression, compulsion, paranoia, phobia, and somatization. And that same study showed that this belief also has a positive influence in the quality of life. So now we can combine the teachings in the gospel with our current scientific research to show you that believing in life after death and reincarnation and understanding that we are immortal spirits can dramatically improve our quality of life and also improves our ability to cope. But coping also implies accepting. As the spirit Hamed said in the book Changing Attitudes, psychographed by Francisco de Espírito Santo Neto, we can only modify things that we admit and clearly see in ourselves. Accepting our reality as it is represents a good act in our lives. Acceptance brings mental peace and lucidity, which allows us to visualize the main starting point and achieve internal transformation in a pleasant way. To summarize our message today, we'll bring a few items that are important to think about when you're going through a difficult situation. Number 1, you should try to understand the situation from a spirit standpoint of view. Consider yourself an immortal spirit destined to perfection, and you see that automatically everything that's going on around you is going to turn smaller and smaller, because that's just a little fraction of your learning curve, and you have to go through many of these difficult situations in order to understand the reality of things. Number 2, remember, vicissitudes of the life have a cause, and since God is just, that cause must also be just, as it's written in the Gospel according to Spiritism. There's always a reason for what's happening to you, and believe me, God, in all His mercy, gave you that chance and evolve. Number 3, do not focus only in your problem or frustrations. Open your mind and your eyes, and you'll see there's a lot more than that. And number 4, reconnect yourself to God. Pray, meditate. God is always sending good energies, and a lot of spiritual friends are around us trying to help us. So if you take the time to ask for help and put yourself in a position of receiving help, everything's going to get better, and you will definitely come out of that situation stronger. Dear listeners, as we come to the end of our segment, we want to thank you all, and remember that an optimistic heart is a medical prescription for peace and happiness. God bless us all.
In the book, A Primer on Being Good by the Spirit May May, psychographed by the medium Chico Xavier, explains in simple language appropriate for children 2 paths in life, the path of good or the path of evil. God has granted us the freedom to choose either one. Purchase your copy online at www.ssbaltimore.org.
Now we return to our program.
We're back with Dr. Krippner, and we're just talking about understanding post-traumatic stress disorder in war veterans, another book of his, written together with Daryl Paulson, Haunted by Combat. Quite interesting. Dr. Krippner, just to illustrate to the listener, we have just come back from a trip to Brazil. You've been there several times. In Brazil, we have other social problems, though there are no actual combats and wars per se. Traditionally speaking, we have different types regarding a developing country issues such as poverty, the slums, just like Rio de Janeiro alone, more than 1,000 slums around, and the social implications of it. In the United States, on the other hand, we don't have those issues per se, but we have this social calamity. Can we call the post-traumatic stresses or the combat stress and its social implications as a social calamity in the United States and in how it's affecting family lives?
Well, yes, there are different types of trauma, of course. In poverty, this is sort of a breeding ground for trauma, because in very, very poor communities, now here I'm talking about the United States, but I've also seen this in Brazil, you have a lot of child abuse, you have a lot of rape, you have a lot of sexual slavery, you have a lot of prostitution of young children, and this traumatizes the young boys and the young girls, and it's hard for them as they grow up to become adults to live a happy life because they've been so traumatized when they were young. So social conditions can certainly bring about any number of traumas. They can bring about teasing and bullying, racial epithets, ethnic epithets, and in some parts of the United States and Brazil, girls are put upon as being worthless, as being second-rate. So just being a girl is a cause for trauma. People with dark skins in both countries are sometimes traumatized. I must say that Brazil has done probably much better than the United States over the years in terms of accepting its very multi-hued population, because there are people of every color in Brazil, and they've all come to great periods of eminence in Brazil over the years. But nevertheless, wherever you find poverty, you find a lot of trauma.
Exactly. So in that line of thought, when you were talking to war veterans in the United States of America, have they also shared perceptions regarding when they were in the call of duty, experiences of, extra physical perceptions such as spirits, spiritual entities playing a role in either pushing them to the difficulties of combat or preventing them from actually engaging in further damage to themselves or others? Have they reported things of that nature?
Well, yes, they have. You mentioned Darrell Paulson, who is my co-author of the book Haunted by Combat, and this book has been very successful. It came out a few years ago. We just did an update and an epilogue. He's written a very interesting article about psychic experiences during warfare, and he served for many years in Vietnam. And uncanny things would happen, like he or his colleagues would know when there was a bomb coming, and they would run to another part of the land before the bomb would come. And also, they would sometimes see a dead comrade, and they would see the spirit of the dead comrade leaving the body and saying that they were going to a better place. So if you look carefully, you can find a number of these accounts. In the United States, there's an American Indian shaman by the name of Fawn Journeyhawk, and she works with veterans of Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and many of them have PTSD because they've killed civilians or they've killed soldiers. And so what she does is to go out of the body and goes back to the battlefield and finds the spirits of the people that they have killed and begs the spirits to forgive them. She says, after all, this is warfare. They were simply carrying out their commands. They thought they were being patriotic. They thought they were saving the world from communism. And if she can persuade the spirits of the dead relatives or the dead children or the dead soldiers to release their grip on the soldier back in her camp, then she comes back and negotiates sort of a reconciliation and says, you're forgiven now. You don't have to have this nightmare anymore because the person you killed is now in a better place. They've now forgiven you. They're waiting for their next incarnation, and maybe their next life will be a happier one. So her approach to PTSD is very spiritual. And yes, and it does involve a lot of emphasis on reincarnation and a lot of emphasis upon working with spirits. And as you know, there are many spirit hospitals in Brazil. And I just have written a chapter with Emma Bragdon about spirit hospitals and spirit therapy in Brazil. And many, many more hospitals and therapists to bring in spiritual aspects than you find in the United States.
Exactly. So it's a new type of awareness. And as you were mentioning before, how do we reach out to this social issue that happens, for example, especially in the United States of America, regarding, combat stress and how it's affecting family lives? Do you think if we propose a more spiritual approach, veterans will be more, they will be opener to conversations, etc., than just like traditional psychotherapy?
Oh, yes. I have had no trouble talking about spiritual topics with veterans. I have to find out what their spiritual background is, because you talk in a different way to somebody who is a Protestant, and somebody who is a Buddhist, to somebody who is a Catholic, to somebody who is a pagan or a Wicca, and also to somebody who is a non-believer, who is an atheist, but still believes that there's a spiritual dimension to people's lives. So you let them do the talking, and you find out what their spiritual base is, and once you find out what their spiritual base is, you know that you have hit the very deepest level of their psyche. And then this is something that you can build upon. Okay, if this is the most important thing in your life, the spiritual aspect of your psyche, how can you build upon that? How can this become a post-traumatic strength? And what can it lead you to in terms of honoring yourself, forgiving yourself, and moving past all of these horrors of war? One of the major contributions of Albert Ellis, the founder of rational emotive behavior therapy, was to get people to accept themselves unconditionally. He said this is USA, unconditional self-acceptance. Now, you can only do this if you have a spiritual basis for your life. Yes, accept yourself. Maybe you did kill a child by mistake. Maybe you did shoot a woman who was carrying a basket of fruit that you thought was a hand grenade. Maybe you did kill a soldier in hand-to-hand combat. Forgive yourself for this. This is what happens in war. And when you are reviewing your nightmare, put a different ending on the nightmare. Put a more positive ending on the nightmare. Put a more uplifting ending on that experience, something that indicates your deep understanding and your deep acceptance of yourself and your acceptance of what is past. What is past you can't remake. You have to focus on the future.
And neuroscience is here to tell us how possible it is to redefine even our neural pathways, the activation of them, by reframing situations, right?
Yes, this is what I tell the people I talk to during my workshops. You have to realize when working with a PTSD survivor that if this therapy is going to be successful, the brain has to be changed. The neural pathways have to be changed. We know that meditation can change neural pathways. We know that different types of spiritual experience can change neural pathways. We know that good psychotherapy can change neural pathways. Well, those who work with veterans and survivors, rape survivors, car accident survivors, bullying survivors, their brains have been injured, and their brains have to be restored. And good therapy can do this. And that's why I often advocate bringing in meditation, bringing in yoga, bringing in art therapy, bringing in sports, bringing in animals. It's wonderful to relate to an animal. Animals can be very accepting of a person. And if the animal accepts you, you can accept yourself.
Mm-hmm. So now we're talking about therapies and healing approaches to post-traumatic stress disorders. You're already mentioning meditation as a real boost to new activation in the brain, to new deactivation of other areas in the brain as well. So arranging the neurobiology of ourselves. So science already points out to that direction, especially neuroimaging studies have already pointed out that direction. So you're talking about meditation, guided imagery, visualizations in general, psychotherapy. And you also mentioned before, Dr. Krippner, about a spiritual approach, of course, culturally adapted to each and every individual, but spiritual approach can also be quite effective in that realm. Correct?
Yes, that's correct. Now remember, with medication, that can change the brain for the better short term. Long term, there are sometimes side effects that are harmful to the brain. So it really pains me to see somebody who's been on medication for several years. I think that once they get the initial benefits of medication, they should switch to something like meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a difference, and maybe your listeners didn't get that. Mm-hmm. Medication is for short term. Meditation is for long term.
Mm.
And so let's move away from the medication and get as quickly as we can into psychotherapy, meditation, guided imagery, prayer, art therapy, maybe even acupuncture and massage. All of those have potentials of affecting the body in a very positive way. And, of course, diet, eating well, getting enough sleep, getting those nightmares resolved. All of that leads to a healthier body and a healthier mind within the healthier body.
Mm-hmm. That needs acceptance that we are a whole multi-dimensional being, right? Take care of all the different dimensions simultaneously, as you're saying.
Yes, we're multi-dimensional being. Yeah, we have to take a whole person approach to the psychotherapy and not depend on just one approach. There's many, many aspects of the person we have to work with.
We will return to our program after these messages.
Kardec Radio, live, every Saturday at 11 a.m.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Save the date for the 6th U.S. Spiritist Symposium that will be held at the Rialto Center for the Arts at Georgia State University in Atlanta, Georgia on Saturday, May 12, 2012. This year's topic is Love and Enlightenment, a Pathway to Self-Healing. Come out and enrich your mind, body, and soul. For more info, go to www.spiritistsymposium.org.
Spread the word. Kardec Radio, to learn more about Spiritism.
The newest edition of the Medium's book by Allan Kardec is now available. Purchase your copy online or via your ebook reader. Simply go to www.ediciofamerica.com today.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Join us every Thursday live. Evolution in Two Worlds, a journey of the soul through the teachings of the Spirit Doctor, Andrea Luiz. Connect at www.tvcei.com, Channel 2.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Spiritism for Everyone, the online study of the Spirit's Book and the Gospel according to Spiritism. Spiritism for Everyone meets every Wednesday evening and Saturday morning using the latest technology in web conferencing. You can join in from any computer in the comfort of your home or office, no matter where you are in the U.S. or the world. Spiritism for Everyone is open, free, and requires no registration. To access the web live meetings, go to www.spiritist.us. Spiritism for Everyone is a program of the United States Spiritist Council.
And now we return to our program.
So, Dr. Krippner, as we come to the last minutes of our pleasurable conversation, there's so much to learn. We are here talking about the many books and your website as well. I want to refer people to your website, stanleykrippner.com, with lots of information, articles, books. so much there, and they can find also your books, Haunted by Combat, and these series of books on biographies of disorders, especially PTSD, at Amazon.com. What would you recommend for people who are there listening to us and realize they are experiencing any form of post-traumatic stress?
Yeah, the new book that we just came out with, Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder, which is on Amazon.com, written by the three of us, Krippner, Pitchford, and Davies, that was written as an introductory book. And that book covers the whole variety of PTSD. And it talks about PTSD in children and adolescents. And it talks about the neuroscience of PTSD, what actually happens to the brain and body. Mm-hmm. And then we talk about the various treatments, but we also have an entire chapter on the positive side and post-traumatic strengths and how somebody can take what they have learned from that traumatic experience and use that as a strength in terms of deepening the character, broadening the personality, and becoming more resilient, becoming more self-accepting, and then, of course, being of help to others.
That very chapter, which is chapter 8, right, the positive side of post-traumatic stress disorder, is quite unique and fascinating. I haven't heard of such a good compilation of insights as I've read in that chapter. And I think, as you're suggesting to the audience, this book can really propose not only clarifications on the definitions and the underlying neurobiology of PTSD, but brings new perspective as well, right? That's what it's all about, the new perspective.
Yes, you read it very well. That's right. It is a new perspective.
Dr. Krippner, we'll never be able to thank you enough for sharing your time and knowledge with us at Kardec Radio. We truly hope we can have you back in the near future to share and teach us more about so much you have been discovering and proposing as therapy for humanity. Thank you so much, Dr. Krippner.
Oh, and thank you.
Now we go to a short break, and when we come back, the segment Spiritist Moment with Kirsten DeMello and, yes, with Bernadette Liao, Youth Education in Spiritism. And at the end of the show, what you have been expecting all along, our prayerful moment of true therapy for our hearts and for all those who are experiencing post-traumatic stress.
We will return to our program after these messages.
For the first time ever, the book Between Heaven and Earth by the spirit André Luiz, psychographed by Chico Xavier, is now in English. This is a novel that offers information about the relationship that exists in the activities of the spirit on the two planes of life. Purchase your copy today at www.ediseiofamerica.com.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Now in English, the book Action and Reaction by the spirit André Luiz, psychographed by Chico Xavier. Buy your copy online or via your ebook reader. Go to www.ediseiofamerica.com today. The International Spiritist Council is organizing and promoting the 7th World Spiritist Congress, which will be held in Havana, Cuba, on March 23rd through the 25th of 2013. The Congress theme will be Charity and Spiritual Education in Building a World of Peace. 150 years of the Gospel according to Spiritism. For more information, please visit www.7cem.org.
And now we return to our program.
Hello, dear Kardec Radio listeners, and welcome back to the Spiritist Moment. Today our topic will be about finding happiness and understanding the divine laws, or natural laws, as the Spirit's book tells us. Well, when we begin to define happiness in modern times today, we look on TV, when we find that happiness almost appears as if it's bottled and sold and advertised through gurus and classes. And if you do this, you'll be happy. If you do that, you'll be happy. If you buy this dress, you'll be so happy. If you eat this food, if you go to this island, you'll be happy. So happiness has really taken a crazy route in our lives. If we can so kindly put it this way, it has gone astray. Our definition of it has gone astray. So how do we define happiness? Firstly, and how do we define happiness as we understand divine laws? Well, first, let us go to the Spirit's book to help us better understand. And it is fascinating what the Noble Spirits share with us in question 614 when Kardec asks them what is meant by natural law. And lo and behold, the Spirits say to us the following: natural law is the law of God. It is the only true law necessary for the happiness of human beings. It shows them what they should or should not do, and they only suffer misfortune because they reject it. Wow, that is powerful for many reasons. Well, for one, it tells us that the very happiness that we continue to look for outside of ourselves, well, we're looking in the wrong direction. We're looking in the wrong place. We need to go and study the laws of God, because as the Spirits share with us, that is what is necessary for our happiness. Not in taking a pill necessarily, or going to this place, or taking vacation here, or obtaining these clothes. No, the Spirits share with us that the only true law necessary for the happiness of human beings is the natural laws. Well, how many of us have gone and studied the natural or divine laws in the Spirit's book? Part 3 of the Spirit's book comprises the laws, divine laws, or natural laws, and the Spirits explain to us. You can go there, read for yourself, and study it. How many of us sit down to actually study these laws? Here we find the keys, the tools for our happiness. And even more astonishing is that they're free. Because in question 621, when Kardec wisely asked the Spirits, where is the law of God written? In the conscience. So, dear friends, we don't need to go on the internet. We don't need to go to a store, to an island to find this happiness. No, right with us, right where you're sitting right now. If you're driving somewhere, if you're in the car, if you're home, if you're at work, it's with you. It's within you. The seeds of all of these immense happiness are within you, but it is up to us to work on it. Interestingly enough, question 619, Kardec asked the Spirits, has God provided all humans the means of knowing God's law? The Spirits wisely answer, all may know about it, but not all understand it. Moral persons and those who desire to examine it are the ones who understand it best. Nevertheless, all will understand it someday, since such understanding is necessary for progress. Wow. And to really drive this point home, in the book Happy Life by Joanna de Angelis, she shares with us in a message that the conquest of knowledge is a personal achievement, non-transferable. It is a treasure that always multiplies itself when it is shared. So, what does this mean for us? Well, the laws of God are written in our conscience, and all may know about it, as the Spirits say, but not all of us understand it. So Joanna says this conquest of knowledge, of understanding more about the moral laws, the natural and divine laws of the universe, this is a personal achievement, something we should reach for, we should strive for, and it is something that can never be taken away from us. It is a treasure, as Joanna says. A treasure, dear friends, that we implore you, we encourage you to seek to study on your own, in your Spiritist Center, with others, about these divine or natural laws in the Spirit's book, and go to enrich your lives. So, dear listeners, as always, we leave you with these inspiring thoughts and wish you many blessings.
Welcome to our Yes, Youth Education Spiritism with the Kardec Radio. I am Bernadette Leal, and I'll be spending a few minutes with you, inspiring to bring the spiritual awareness and spiritist teachings to our youth, parents, and educators. Today, we will answer 3 questions about how to prepare your child to go to bed. First question: I have noticed that my child does not have a good night's sleep. He wakes up in the middle of the night crying or having nightmares. Why does this happen? First, let's talk about the purpose of sleeping. According to the restoration model, sleep recharges our run-down bodies and allows us to recover from physical and mental fatigue. So if your child does not have a good night's sleep, it can affect his health and mood, and he may show some irritability and fatigue during the day. But even though his body is resting, his spirit is active. The spirit does not need to replenish its energy. In question 401 of the Spirit's book, Kardec asks the spirits, does the soul rest as the body does during sleep? And the spirits answered, no. The spirit is never inactive. The binds connecting it to the body loosen during sleep. And since the body doesn't require its presence in that state, the spirit is relatively free to move about and seek the company of other spirits. So while your child is sleeping, his spirit partially frees from the body and it enters their spiritual realm. There, your child's spirit will have the opportunity to connect with other spirits, learn, receive guidance, inspiration, and also repair his moral strength. Unfortunately, his spirit may also go to places surrounded by negative energy or meet spirits of lower tendencies. As a result, his spirit can vividly live in an unpleasant spiritual encounter and experience of fear, sadness, distress, and other negative feelings that will disturb his sleep and sometimes cause nightmares. That's why on item 38, the Gospel according to Spiritism teaches us that we should lift up our thoughts to God before we go to bed. We should educate our children and also ourselves on how to prepare our body, mind, and spirit to an important part of our lives, sleep time. Second question: how can I help my child have a good night of sleep at night? Here are some suggestions that you may adopt to best fit your family schedule. But keep in mind that once you develop a routine, it is very important to be consistent on what you do and how you do it. The whole preparation may take about 30 to 45 minutes from the time you start getting your child ready to bed till he actually falls asleep. You should start by making sure your child doesn't have a heavy meal before he goes to bed, or drink anything with sugar or caffeine a few hours prior to his bedtime. Then do your usual bedtime routine, like drinking a glass of milk, brushing his teeth, showering, putting his pajamas on, things like that. The goal is to help your child to unwind and begin to prepare to sleep. Children and teenagers are mentally connected to their daily actions, and their minds are very busy. So a parent's job is to do their best to help their children to disconnect from the events that happen during the day or any trouble thoughts so they can relax. We strongly recommend to not let children watch any violent movies, play video games, or do anything that stimulates them before they go to bed, because some of the images will be registered in their consciousness and it could lead to bad dreams or keep them awake at night. For teenagers, try to limit the use of computer, social media, texting, and cell phones by setting up a time in which they will stop using those devices. And as you do it, explain to your child in a calming voice why you're doing it. Otherwise, he may think he's being punished. Another behavior that should be avoided is to allow your children to do their homework late in the evening and in bed. They fall asleep while studying, not preparing themselves to the valuable time in which they soon will be connecting with the spiritual realm. Another suggestion is to have some classical or relaxation music that will help your child to relax. One huge mistake is to let a child fall asleep by the sound of the TV because it can disturb the sleep cycle. A peaceful environment is conducive for a good night of sleep. So as you put your child to bed, spend some time with him. You can read a story, not a scary one, to start focusing his mind into something else, something positive. For teenagers, you may read an encouraging text, a nice poem, or one of the many spiritist messages that bring great enlightenment. Avoid talking about their worries or school drama right before they go to bed. If you know there is something bothering your child, engage in a conversation earlier, but not when he is ready to go to sleep. Also, check your child's mood. If he goes to bed sad, stressed, worried, it will affect his sleep. Finally, as you notice that your child is calm, say together a sincere prayer, asking his guardian angel to lead, protect, and inspire his spirit to his spiritual journey. Third question: how should I pray with my child at bedtime? Some parents have taught their children a bedtime prayer. A very popular one is, "Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I shall die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take." If your child says this prayer or any other you may have taught him, this is a good beginning, because you are teaching him the habit of praying before he goes to sleep. Then, you should add a spontaneous, heartfelt prayer asking God and your child's guardian angel to lead him and I into the spiritual world so that he will have a good experience and receive the guidance he needs while sleeping. In the last chapter of the Gospel According to Spiritism, item 39, there is an example of a bedtime prayer. It says, "Lord, for a few short instants, my soul will be together with other spirits. So I beg the good spirits to come and give me counsel. Guardian angel, please help me to keep a lasting and beneficial impression of this encounter on awakening." You may say that prayer or create your own, but keeping the same idea. As your child says a prayer, make sure it's not just recitation or it has no feelings or intention. Pause after some words and sentences and think about its meaning. Another wonderful thing you can do before you start a bedtime prayer is to show gratitude. Teach your child to say thanks for all that he has received: material things, people, accomplishments, health, and mostly for God's love and presence in his life. Kardec Radio listeners, many of us have a hectic life. We are so busy with our schedule and work that we do not give much importance to how we go to sleep at bedtime, falling asleep sometimes watching TV. And that's the example that we are giving to our children. You may be thinking, I don't have the time to spend with my child preparing him to go to sleep. But how much time have we spent with things that can wait, like texting, checking emails, watching TV, that can wisely be dedicated to a child? Plus, the two of you will be benefiting from the precious time in which you will also be preparing yourself for bed and the wonderful opportunity to bond with your child. So let's start today. Tonight, unplug. Connect with your child, and together, get ready for a great time of preparing your body, mind, and spirit to sleep. Good night, and sleep with the angels. Thanks for listening to Yes. And if you have any questions that would like us to answer, please email to Kardec@KardecRadio.com.
Good morning, dear Kardec Radio listeners, and welcome to one more program of God at Home. I am Nour Fonseca.
And I am Gabi Ferreira. Today we're going to study Chapter 12, The Four Tests, from the book Jesus in the Home, psychographed by Chico Xavier.
In today's story, we're going to meet four heavenly teachers. They are like invisible agents that can arrive at any time in our lives to spy on us, to see whether we're being nice or not.
After reading a few passages about Job's faithfulness in the Old Testament, Jesus told the following story. In the old city of Nineveh, there was a man who was so deeply devoted to God that all of his contemporaries held him in particularly high esteem. The praises for his behavior were so lavish that news about it rose up to the Eternal's throne. Now, because several archangels were asking the Almighty to bring him back to heaven, the divine wisdom gave the order for him to be sought out in the jungle of the flesh in order to determine if he was, in fact, prepared for such a sublime investiture.
One, which is always first to appear in such cases, approached the great believer and made its presence felt in a number of different ways by afflicting him with hardships, obstacles, illnesses, and abandonment by loved ones. However, the devout man, full of confidence, knew that the messenger was a heavenly worker and defeated it, proving himself to be increasingly stronger in the virtues of which he had become a model.
Then it was wealth's turn. It approached the man and granted him a lavish table, vast resources, and all types of social considerations. But the foresightful disciple remembered charity, and distancing himself from the temptation of easy pleasures, he distributed his money and possessions through a number of good deeds. Thus, he achieved financial stability and everyone's admiration.
Having proven victorious in the second trial, it was power's turn, which invested him with broad, illustrious authority. The devout man, however, remembered that life with all its honors and gifts is merely a loan from heaven's providence, and he carefully made use of his power by teaching all those around him through instruction and well-guided work, receiving in exchange the obedience and admiration of the people among whom he had been born.
Triumphant and happy, the believer was finally visited by anger. In order to probe his spiritual state, the invisible teacher made use of a weak and unlearned servant to touch his self-esteem by talking with obvious disregard about a private matter. Although what he said was in fact true, it constituted real disrespect toward anyone of such a social position and inarguable dignity. The devout man could not help himself. An intense wave of blood spread across his flushed face, and he lost control of himself by hurling hurtful words, wounding family members and servants and undermining everything he had done. It took him a number of days to regain his composure, but by then anger had already laid bare his inner spirit, showing that he still had a lot of work to do. Anger notified the Lord that this particular son, enrolled in the school of illumination, still had a long way to go in the purifying experience in order to earn a position in the glorious vibrations of the higher life.
So, at last, the invisible teachers found the innermost state of the man of our story. Have you noticed that each agent, want, wealth, power, and anger, had a secret device, a virtue detector? With their instruments, they could tell if someone was patient, charitable, humble, or pure, which are the virtues of a good person.
Anytime you're visited by one of these divine messengers, try to think of the lesson they are asking you to learn. The more we practice them, the further we move from our animal origin and towards our angelical destiny.
Of the 4 trials, anger was the most difficult. That's because anger is a basic emotion, one that we share with our irrational beings of creation. It is very hard not to feel angry sometimes, maybe even impossible at our stage. So, refrain from making any decisions when you feel very angry. Let's listen to what Joana de Angelis has to suggest for moments like this.
Do not let the insult someone hurls at you ruin your day. There are plenty of kind people around you, so it's not right to waste time on those who constitute the exception. Leave the offense on the floor of forgetfulness and continue in the direction of the love that awaits you.
After this much of enlightenment, we'd like to invite you now, dear listener, to our prayerful moment. Prayer can also be true therapy for the soul. In the book Mechanisms of Mediumship by the Spirit Dr. André Luiz, he talks about prayer as being also a mechanism of hygiene for the soul. Let us now raise our thoughts, connect consciously to our dear Creator, dear Lord of life. We are so grateful, and we'd like to dedicate this prayer to all those men and women who are there suffering from combat stress, from all different forms of post-traumatic stress, and are in search of relief. May they receive, wherever they may be, these showers of light. And we thank you so much for the show today. We ask for your blessings to our audience, to Dr. Stanley Krippner for sharing and being such a good collaborator of Spiritism, not only in the United States, but around the world. And so be it. Dear listener, in a week, we're going to report to you highlights of the amazing 6th U.S. Spiritist Symposium, an amazing meeting that is happening at these very moments, in this very day as we're speaking, and we are going to share with you lots of important highlights so we can live better and illuminate our pathways into this reincarnation. We wish you many blessings, and we'll talk to you in a week.
Thank you for listening to Kardec Radio, broadcasting live every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Email us and share your comments at www.kardecradio.com. Until next time, we wish you many blessings.